Fresh Apples. Can you tell us about your journey?
Well, it started quite a while before Fresh Apples, actually. I started writing a novel when I was 16. I was still at school, but I felt I had this story in me that I wanted to get out, and it was published the year I left university. But it was, although it was a novel, it was about my own life, really, so thinly veiled memoir. So I didn't know where to go from there, and somebody suggested short stories would be easier than trying another novel. So that's what I did, and I fell in love with short stories, and then I won the Dylan Thomas Prize for them.
What about Helen? How was your journey like?
I actually started a novel during my PhD, which didn't get printed, didn't get published, and I wrote another novel which took me 4 years and then spent 4 years being rejected. And then I had my first collection of short stories, On the Edges of Vision, which won the Saltire First Book of the Year award. And then that opened so many doors for me, so I started getting things published. I got my second novel published after that.
Sienna, you're an established playwright. What makes you write plays?
I guess I did. I studied drama at university, so and I did a lot of acting. So when I couldn't get a job after university, I was kind of drawn to a writing group and found myself writing a play. And like the other two speakers today, it was winning a competition with that play that set me off on a journey of writing plays, short stories, and novels. So for any aspiring writers out there, send your work out to competitions. All three of us are testament to the usefulness of submitting your work, getting your work out in the world. Because I think once you're on that kind of path, it's quite difficult to get off. And I write plays just because I write anything, because I have to. It's like breathing.
So what are the challenges that you faced? I know challenges are very individual, but what do you think is one of the biggest challenges you faced when you were starting out into the literature world?
Do you want to give your answer that you gave me this morning?
So I think the biggest challenge for any writer, if you're just starting out or if you're even quite established, is financial. It's incredibly hard to make money as a writer, and nobody tells you this. But the average salary for a writer is something like £11,000, something very low for a year to live in the UK. When you're paying your rent is in some places £800 or £1,000. So you could see you'd be really struggling. And I think you have to manage working at something else to support your writing, and that takes a big toll, but it also provides material. So it's this kind of juggling act that you have to do constantly as a writer.
So yeah, I agree with that. But apart from that, when you're young, a lot of people won't take you seriously. So they kind of put you into a box and tell you what you can write and what you can't write. You're allowed to write about youth culture, but anything else is too ambitious. So there's that.
When I was a playwright, I found myself getting pushed into writing for children's plays. I wasn't interested in writing for children. There are some great plays written for children, but I didn't want to write them. I wanted to write for grown-ups. And all my male contemporaries were getting gigs writing for grown-ups. So again, like Rachel says, I was being pushed into a certain direction. And so I think that's really important for writers to kind of not maybe have one ear listening to what people are saying they want you to write, but one ear very firmly, more importantly, tuned into what it is you want to write. I think it's really important to hold fast to what is driving you, because the reader or the audience will pick that up. That's what makes our work compelling, is when somebody knows, that you're writing, from the guts, like Elaine Chu was saying, or from the heart,
So do you mean to say that as women you have faced gender bias in the writing industry?
Yeah, like everywhere.
Can you tell us one experience?
Well, like Rachel says, so one experience, yeah? so many to choose from. I mean, that one, writing for children, even when I was a young woman, 20, and I had no children. Now, maybe it would be more sensible to ask me to write for children because I have my own children. But even then, I think, men with children don't get asked to write for a young audience in the same way. You could argue that a lot of people viewed my first novel, which is partly narrated by an 11-year-old child. People were asking me, is it for a young audience? Is it a YA novel? No, it's not a YA novel. And I'm not sure that they would have asked a male author the same question. Any other experiences of gender bias in the industry?
Nothing specific in the industry, but just constantly being called a Welsh woman writer. Like, it's obvious I'm a woman, so why do you have to, describe me as a woman? It's obvious that, yeah.
I think some of my experiences with male editors have been a little tricky. Like, you can feel their heart is in the right place, but the choices they make with your text and the attitude towards you is quite occasionally condescending in a way that working with a female editor hasn't been. There's a lot more support there and critique as well, which is very, very important, of course, to make your writing the best it can be, is to have somebody look at it and tell you this is wrong, go fix it. But with male editors, they often doubt my choices or say things like, "Did you know you were doing this?" I'm like, yes.
I've got another one in that my second novel began as quite experimental in form. It kind of was playing with the boundaries between fiction and non-fiction. I was working as a childminder, and then my novel was about a psychotic childminder, so go figure. But it was quite experimental in the way it played with, is this real, is this not real? And I think, a couple of early readers said, it's a bit too playful, a bit too experimental. And again, I'm not sure that a male author would have had that reaction. A woman of a certain age is not allowed to experiment or not allowed to be playful, perhaps. But hey, we can play just as well as the boy.
And how many of you write poetry regularly?
I do, and I think I write flash fiction that crosses into the boundaries of poetry, and I feel myself using the same mechanisms to get those little engines running that I do in poetry.
But do you think that you outgrow poetry at one point as you go through?
Oh, that sort of feels like poetry is like an emo thing to do. Oh, he doesn't love me, I'll just write this long poem about it. I did do that, being honest. When I was a teenager, I did write those sad sack poems, but I think you need to have every form available to you, because no one form can encompass everything, every aspect of your life or every way of thinking. So you need to have these new avenues, these new different mechanisms to come to. And I often start writing without planning what I'm doing, and a poem will form, and I can see the form emerging and go, I need to have it in this way.
I think rather than poetry being a form that you maybe grow out of, I feel it maybe is a form that you should grow into. I feel like I'm working towards poetry is the most distilled form and the most kind of crystalline, and so possibly I wouldn't feel able to write it until I'm ancient and wise, more ancient than I am.
Yeah, I agree with you. I haven't written any poetry, but I think I'd like to. I think it's something. I always think when I've got more time, I'll attack it.
So are there any forms that you save for later? A form that you start out of, and a form that you would do much later when you have enough experience, you would think?
So the other two guests have written plays, but I've never written one. And I would really like to have that opportunity, but I feel like as someone who doesn't know what they're doing with plays, you need to have support a little bit to have exposure and how to form that on the page. And I feel like hopefully in my future, if I've built up enough of a reputation, somebody will go, come and we'll help you give you the tools. So maybe it's a matter of like what stage your career is in, what forms come open to you in some ways.
Also, I think it's interesting. I was told when I first started writing prose to practice my craft by writing short stories. And I never felt that was good advice, because short story is a very particular form, and I found it much harder to kind of manage than a novel. The difficulty is that, novels take a couple of years to write, so by the time you finish your first novel, you're a much better writer, and then you're writing the next one. I wrote 4 novels, that never saw light of day before my first novel got published. And so for me, short stories was something I had to work towards. I'm publishing my first collection in March, and that felt a very very hard form to kind of understand and wrangle, to my satisfaction and to the satisfaction of my publisher. And I thought, oh, now I've done it. Oh, thank God, I never have to write another short story again. I'll just go back to my nice, big, baggy, old, comfy novels, like a big pair of trousers, wow, really comfy. But actually I've found myself, I'm now kind of in the rhythm of short stories, and so possibly I've found myself writing more short stories, and so possibly it's a form that won't quite leave me alone.
Actually, I think the novel is something I'm working towards, because although I've written 2 novels, as I said, the first one was kind of a memoir, really, and I was never happy with the second one. So I'm working towards the perfect novel.
I think every author ever is working towards the perfect novel, and they never feel they get there.
Can you tell us about your latest work?
So my latest work was a play called Cotton Fingers, which was just at Edinburgh, won an award. I have a short novel. It's coming out in the autumn, and I'm working on a longer novel as well.
Do you think you could maybe read out one of your favorite lines from your work?
No. No, I never remember it. I never remember lines.
I mean, from Fresh Apples, or something you've already written.
Favorite line. Sorry. There is one, but I have to find it. Okay, I'll never find it. I'm just going to read the first one that comes to me. Okay. Over the mountain, the lumpy plains of fresh green ferns, the arms on their stems uncurling, slow worms crawling underneath them. A 20-minute drive away, Graham lay on his smoke-colour Draylon settee. It's random. Sorry.
Your Goldblum Variations has been very successful. That I heard that it has come out in October with more content.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little about them?
So this is a collection that had a very strange life. I was invited onto a podcast, and for this podcast I had to write a bit of original content. And so I wrote some very, very short microfiction pieces about, but not really about, Jeff Goldblum. So one of them was how Jeff Goldblum enters a house that is made of living cats and sort of wanders around. And I thought, oh, that's just the end of that. And then my publisher, 404 Inc., said, why don't you make a little pamphlet so to attract readers? And I sat down, and 2 days I just churned out a little bit about, further stories about Jeff Goldblum. And then they sold that to Penguin, and Penguin said, please add some more pages so it's technically a book. And so I just let myself kind of dream these weird scenarios about Jeff Goldblum in alternative Earths. There's games. There's perfume samples, which you have to use your imagination with. But yeah, it kind of all organically sort of unfolded. And it's taken me really by surprise how people have responded.
What is the strangest situation he's been in?
Oh, let me think.
Are all of them equally strange?
They're all pretty strange. At one point, he is a jacket. At one point, he is you. Everyone who's reading, he becomes you. That's quite odd.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want me to read from She Clown, my new collection of short stories, I'll choose to read the first line, because somebody said, why would you start with that in a collection of feminist short stories, you know, short stories that are centered on the female experience? Karina's mother stared at the man's penis. It was misshapen like a dahlia tuber with pendulous balls hanging below. The name Leonardo was written in different coloured letters in an arc above the drawing like a rainbow. And so people said, why begin with a penis, a man's penis? It's a feminist collection. But I'm like, yeah, men have been staring at women's bodies long enough. It's time for women to stare at men's bodies. And she's looking at a Leonardo da Vinci drawing in a classroom. So it's very innocent, but I held fast to that editor's suggestion that I start the book with something different. I said, no, I'm beginning with her looking at this man's penis.
Do you think it offends people more when a woman writes like that?
Probably.
All right.
No, I don't think people are offended. I think they're just asking, and that's good. It's good to have that dialogue. And the dialogue in this book is about the female gaze, you know, the female experience of the world, because I think the time is right for men and women to talk about what it is to be a woman moving through the world.
Rachel, you said that you're often called a Welsh woman writer. Why do you think that people would like to establish some difference between a woman writer? We never say a male writer or a man writer, but why a woman writer?
I think because they're telling women to go to the audience, you know, like they're telling men it's not for you because there's a woman. Because I mean that's the way it works. That men don't read women's writing.
Yeah, I think that's sadly true. With my own situation, it's been kind of strange because a number of reviewers, and I should say male reviewers, have called my prose muscular. And all the comparisons they've made with my work are to men. So there's this kind of sense that I'm not inhabiting a female voice, but I'm like, what does that even mean? What you presume that women can only write a certain way, and it's kind of bleeding into this, that if you write something that's strange or violent, as sometimes my work is, or punchy, that's not female somehow, which is really odd to have that people have these assumptions and they haven't addressed them and they don't fully understand. I think a lot of the sexism is really unconscious in that way. It's very rare to find someone who is an out-and-out misogynist.
So we do judge the book not just by the cover but by the name as well, whether it's a man or a woman. It's still a pity that we still do that. We can take a break and take questions from the audience as well, in between. Would anyone like to ask questions? Okay, no questions yet. We'll just continue our conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the She Clown?
She Clown, in fact, was a short piece of writing that I submitted for a competition run by my now publisher, Myriad. I didn't win the competition, but I was shortlisted, and then they subsequently published my first novel. But years later, the publisher said, what about that She Clown story? I really like that. Have you got any more stories? And he said, oh, I'll have a look. And I found 18 short stories that I was kind of working on. So kind of polished She Clown, and then it got shortlisted for another competition. So again, send your work out to competitions in order to kind of generate that interest in your work. And She Clown she's a party entertainer. She's a children's party entertainer. But I think she's useful as a kind of symbol of the way all of us, men and women, are performing our roles, not just our gender roles, but roles that we assign ourselves, roles that our culture assign us. We're all performing ourselves around this centre, which might be quite different to the performance we give out.
What are the themes that you deal with in your short stories? Do you deal with social issues or women's issues?
Yeah, definitely social issues and women's issues are just, they just come into it naturally because I'm a woman. But yeah, so I write mostly about the place where I grew up and still live, the Rhondda Valley, which is post-industrial. Got a lot of problems there with very low unemployment, although things are getting better. But they really weren't when I was growing up in the 80s. It was horrendous. So and that's mainly what I was writing about then, when I first started.
What about you?
I think women's issues come into my stories, despite the fact they say they're very masculine. That the first story of On the Edges of Vision is called Pretty Dead Girl Takes a Break, and it's about this woman, the sort of archetype of the murdered woman from TV shows. Like every single detective story, it seems, has a dead woman, and in that story I have her come up and kind of escape her narrative. And just do something for herself, which is just as simple. She just makes herself a coffee and just sits for a bit. Yeah, looks after herself in the way she can. And I try and, I come back to these experiences and just even writing female perspectives, I think, is important in a world that's kind of maybe not as interested in female perspectives. Like getting awards is amazing, but I think if you look at awards lists, you'll see quite a lot of men on them, despite the fact that women are writing more. The industry has more women in it, and that's kind of interesting to see.
So for young writers out here, what advice would you give them?
Write every day. That was the advice I was given on the first day of my undergrad degree. Write every day. And it doesn't have to be your great work. It can be a shopping list, or it can be a note to your mum saying you're going to be in late or whatever. But if you're writing every day, you're keeping that writing muscle flexed and you're articulating yourself in words. And I think that's really helpful, because it means that blank page is not terrifying. There's nothing to be feared from what writing might expect of you.
Yeah, I would agree with just write, because a lot of the time young people say to me, I've got this idea for that, I got this idea, and it's never about putting the idea down on the page. So it's just put the pen down. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It's the first draft is supposed to be crap. That's the way it works.
I agree with that too, but I'd also say read every day and just try and keep exposing yourself to new ideas and diverse writing, not just read in your own tiny bubble. Just try and take in as much new stuff as you can. Everything's really accessible these days with you can read journals online for free, whereas before you used to have to subscribe and it was quite expensive. Just get all of these different perspectives and rejuvenate yourself that way.
The distance between the writer and the publisher has become bigger and bigger now because of agents, and it's really difficult for youngsters because they don't know how to get their way into the industry. How were you able to get your first works published?
My publisher came first, because it was a really small independent publisher who I was very close to. He'd actually put an advert in my local newspaper looking for short stories, and I said, I've got a short story, and he invited me to a party. So it was very close. And then later on, I went to a larger publisher and got the agent and everything. I'm still very much in touch with he's publishing my next novel. So I can go to him with pitches and ideas, and I know he listened to what I'm trying to write, and it's harder with the big publishers.
All three of us are with independent publishers, and all three of us went direct. Yeah, all three of us went direct to the publisher, so not via a middleman agent. I had an agent, and she was a very big agent, really successful agent, Zadie Smith's agent, and she couldn't get me a deal. Because I wasn't Zadie Smith. So, it's about perfecting your craft, making sure the writing is strong enough, and then going direct to the publisher is a possible route that we three have taken.
Yeah, I think that it's one of the most open ways of getting to it is to find the publisher who is working either in your niche of form or is trying to support that particular writers. Like, so I am now with 404 Inc., who's it's a small press run by two women, so they're very, very, strongly feminist, and they're trying to get women's voices out there. And that's where you find the way in, I think.
Have you ever written a book, taken it to the publisher, and come back with an entirely different book?
No, because they ask you to make changes, and editing is such a wonderful thing. And it's really important to get an outside perspective. But if they tell you to change your whole book, then I think they didn't want you.
So that was like the story I was telling you about my first novel. The story agent said, "Oh, I love your work, I love your writing. Why don't you cut this story in half and make it into Hunger Games?" And I didn't want to write Hunger Games. I wasn't interested in writing Hunger Games. Again, being asked to write for a young adult audience, I don't know why she would say that. That was not what I was writing. So I think, again, for new writers out there, it's important to kind of tune into what it is you want to write and to resist, even when it's somebody who could advance your career, that's going to advance your career and make you quite unhappy, rather than staying with what you know to be true to your own intentions. So, it would be a bad sign to come away with a book that you hadn't planned to write, I think.
Yeah, if you believe in your book, and you must do to have spent all that time writing it. If somebody tells you to change the whole thing, you say no, I'm taking it to a different publisher. Or the one I had was, this is 2 books in one, split it into 2, and I didn't. It's just still on the table.
All right. I'm thinking about that because many writers do face this issue, don't they? When they go and they feel the pressure of the industry in changing it so that it pleases the audience and it sells more. And it takes a lot to resist that as well. So what are your plans for the future? What is the next book that's just going to come out?
Well, it's that small novel that's coming out in the autumn. And once that's out the way, it's finishing the longer novel. I'm consciously not writing plays for a while, because as my editor is telling me, I'm forgetting how to set up scenes in a prose setting. I'm scared that I'm going to forget how to write prose, so I'm going to dedicate a couple of years just to prose.
I'm getting into my big trousers. I'm going to be writing my big baggy old novel. It's going to take me ages.
I have a novel coming out next year called Bitter Hall. It's 3 voices telling the same story, but from their different perspectives, like sort of Rashomon style. And I've also finished a collection of short stories, and I'm working on a novel with the author Kamila Gradova, who's absolutely excellent. If you ever get a chance to read her book, her short stories, The Doll's Alphabet, do. We're writing about castrati, which is going to be interesting, I think. The singers, the castrated singers, they were very popular in Europe in the 18th and 19th century.
Can you read from your book? Helen.
Okay. I'll do a bit from Pretty Dead Girl Takes a Break, since I've mentioned it. She peels back the plastic and gets out of the water, a little clumsy with her limbs not moving right, and her blue-black blood slow shot through them. She hasn't opened her eyes yet. They've been closed that long she has to pry the lids apart with thick fingers, prop them open a while, practice her blinks. Though her sight is keen, and if there were anyone here, they'd see eyes of a glorious brightness, clear like something raised on fish and chilled glacial water. God, she needs a cigarette. Clothes first. She climbs out of the TV and into an unoccupied room furnished with a battered tartan sofa covered in pillows and a TV table sprawled with sweet wrappers and old bills. She leaves the room for the hall, for the bathroom and the towels for her body and her hair. She should probably take a shower to rinse clean of the scum from the lake, but you can have enough contact with water, you know. In the little bedroom, she finds a drawer of plaid shirts and another with sweats. She gets into the clothes, and if she can't really feel warm, at least she feels something new, more going on than body and dead and girl. The dead girl makes herself a coffee in the wood-panelled kitchenette and stirs in 4 teaspoons of sugar plus cream, and it's the best thing she's ever tasted, and she licks the foil of the cream pot before folding it back in place. There's a packet of cigarettes on the table under a cable bill, but it's not a brand she likes, and there's no lighter. Well, whatever. She uses the stove and goes back to the sofa with her coffee and her smoke. What's on the TV? 2 detectives in a car, 2 men eloquently snarling at each other. Countryside rolls past, long and humid and green, like a summer dying from oversaturation. Or it's cityside, bleak in February. Her death is always about things other than her death. The dead girl puffs on her cigarette, slurps her coffee. Not long now. There's the sugarcane field. There's the alley. She gets out of her clothes. Always naked. She flicks her hair back from her eyes, takes a drag and holds her breath, which she can hold forever. She mashes the butt into the table, back into the TV. Here's nothing but a desolate space, green or stony. She picks her shoeless way across the ground, arms bound at her back, against her throat a delicate bruise. He's killed her already, so at least there's that. And there's the spot that she's been left, right up against that tree, right behind that wall. There's the spot where she'll be found. Car engine in the distance. Those men talking already. They don't ever shut up. She lies down and faces the sky, letting out slow one last mouthful of smoke.
Wow. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
So, are all 3 of you full-time writers?
No. I'm not.
No, I edit. I'm an editor.
So, when do you find time to write? In your business
I
schedules?
kind of split it sort of the week, so it works out as 3 days working and 2 days writing. But I don't do it that way. I need large amounts of time to write. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I'd maybe do 2 weeks work on and then 2 weeks writing.
I have 2 jobs. I teach part-time creative writing at the University of Glasgow, and I also work in an old cinema, which is just for basic rate of pay. It's that juggling act that you have to do just to make ends meet and do what you want to. It's just write whenever I can, basically. Maybe not even every day as I'd wish.
I teach creative writing at a number of different institutions, but I try and get up early enough to do 2 hours writing before I go and look at other people's writing. But yeah, very few writers, probably only J.K. Rowling, can actually just live according to their writing. I think the rest of us are busy scrabbling around, doing other jobs and fitting the writing in.
Do you feel that